Hi, my name is Arabella, and my story begins with what seemed like the happiest moment of my life. I finally felt like my efforts, my years of hard work and patience were paying off, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe deeply and say, I deserve this. I'm only 34 years old, but at some point, I realized I'd already come a long way, and frankly, it wasn't an easy one. For the past few years, I've been working as a product manager at a large IT company, and despite always finding the field incredibly competitive, sometimes even cutthroat, I've managed to establish myself there and secure a good position that pays so well that 2 months ago, I was finally able to fulfill a dream I'd been whispering about since my student days. I bought my own house, not just any house, but a spacious, bright 4-bedroom building with a huge backyard where I could already imagine boisterous evenings with friends and quiet morning breakfasts on the porch, a hot cup of coffee in hand. Surrounded only by the sounds of birdsong and the scent of freshly cut grass, I fell in love with this house from the moment I stepped through its doors. High ceilings, wide windows, sturdy wooden floors that echoed with a barely audible whisper with every step, and a warm, almost tangible silence, as if the walls knew they were waiting for me. For the last 2 months, I've lived in pure delight, choosing furniture, matching wall colors, wandering through stores, arguing with myself about where the bed should go and where the chair should be, and I derived childish joy from it, as if I were reimagining my life, only now everything depended solely on me. But despite all my small victories in settling down, somewhere deep inside, the shadow of old resentments and memories connected with my family lingered. I have parents in their early 60s and a younger sister, Beatrice, who recently turned 31. It would seem we should be closer, but our family dynamics were always far from harmonious. My parents favored Beatrice from childhood. They always had money for her, always had strength for her, always had excuses for her, even when she stumbled. I, however, knew the value of every penny from an early age. I started working at 16, saving every penny I earned to pay for my education, and simultaneously ran a small business repairing computers and helping people solve technical problems, because I understood that if I didn't take that step, no one would. And so, when the time came to apply to college, I was almost shocked when my parents suddenly announced they were willing to give me $30,000 to pay for my education. This amount only covered part of the expenses. I covered the rest with my scholarship and part-time jobs. But the very fact that they helped me was so unexpected that it took me a long time to get used to the idea. After graduating from college in another state, I returned home for a while, but soon found a job, rented my first apartment, and began building a life on my own, step by step, year by year, carefully putting every bit of savings into a savings account for the future. It was this money that ultimately became the foundation for buying my house. The irony is that even now, when I'm fully on my feet and can be proud of myself, my parents continue to help Beatrice. They pay her rent because she and her husband, David, as always, can't manage on their own. I tried not to dwell on it, as I was too tired of the same old drama and comparisons. I only wanted one thing: to show everyone that I'd made it, that I could do it, that I had my own place. Last week, I invited my parents and my sister and her husband to see my house for the first time. They knew I'd bought it, but they'd never stopped by before. When they arrived that evening after work, I proudly opened the door and, smiling, led them through the rooms. I noticed their expressions change as they walked through the door. In the living room, their eyes slowly wandered over the brand new furniture, the smooth wood floors, and the large windows. Beatrice went upstairs and began looking at the bedrooms, while we stayed downstairs. When she returned, there was a strange expression on her face, and her voice was unexpectedly sharp. You don't need all these rooms, you live alone. I couldn't help but reply calmly but firmly, I won't always be alone, someday I'll have a family, and I've always dreamed of a big, spacious house. I saw a flicker of envy in her eyes, and the corners of her lips twitch with displeasure, but she said nothing more. Instead, her mother approached her, gently patted her on the shoulder, and said words that sounded both mysterious and jarring to me. Don't worry, darling, everything will be fine. What was that supposed to mean? Why did she say that to her of all people? Soon they left, and I decided that the moment was over. I'd shown them my house, they'd seen how well I was doing, and now it was time to move on. 2 weeks later, I decided to throw a real housewarming party. I sent out invitations to friends, colleagues, relatives, and, of course, invited my parents and Beatrice. The day arrived, and by 6 o'clock in the evening, guests had begun to arrive, colleagues from work, old college friends, neighbors I'd gotten to know. The evening was turning into a real joy, laughter, music, glasses of wine, the smell of cooking. But my parents and sister were still missing. Around 7, I received a text from my mother. Dad and I aren't feeling well, my blood pressure is high, we're being cranky, sorry, we can't come. I felt a pang of disappointment, but honestly, I wasn't surprised. My parents never knew how to share my victories. I pretended everything was fine and continued enjoying the evening. And then, around 8, the front door swung open, and Beatrice and David appeared, but the strange thing was, they weren't empty-handed, they were lugging suitcases into the house. I stopped in the middle of the room, completely perplexed, and asked, "What kind of luggage is that?" Beatrice smiled as calmly as if it were an ordinary evening, and said, "Mom said we could stay with you, we're moving, where's the best bedroom? We need you to get it ready." I stared at her, speechless, and only one word trembled in the air as it escaped my lips: "What are you even talking about?" But David didn't seem to hear me. He was already striding upstairs, carrying heavy suitcases, and my palms literally went cold as I watched him head straight for my master bedroom, fling open the door, and, without a moment's hesitation, carry the luggage inside. As if in a dream, I followed him, and my heart sank as I saw him set their bags down right by the window, where the neatly folded pillows had stood just yesterday. "What are you doing there?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Getting settled," Beatrice replied calmly, appearing behind me as if this whole situation had been prearranged. She walked past me and began unzipping suitcases, taking out bundles of clothes, and carefully placing them right in my closet. "You need to move your things out of here," she said, not even looking me in the eye. "This will be our room from now on." I stood there in complete shock, unable to scream or protest, because my guests were still downstairs, probably wondering where I'd disappeared to, and the only thought burning inside me was, how could this even be possible? I took a deep breath and finally said, "Beatrice, you can't just move into my house without asking me." But her answer was an icy sentence: "Mom's already cleared everything with you." I felt something collapse inside me, and I barely kept my hands from shaking. "No, absolutely not," I whispered, though I knew my voice was shaking. I hurried downstairs, trying to pull a mask of calm onto my face so as not to ruin the celebration in front of everyone gathered. People kept approaching me with drinks, asking if everything was okay, but I just smiled, pretended nothing out of the ordinary had happened, and repeated, "Yes, yes, everything is fine." My heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear their voices, and then I slipped outside, pulled out my phone, and dialed my mother's number. The phone rang for a long time, but there was no answer. 5 minutes later, the screen flashed with a new message: "Just don't make a scene. Beatrice deserves this house as much as you do. She'll live with you until she saves up for her own place." I read it 3 times, and every letter seemed to cut me in the heart, because it seemed my mother seriously believed that my sister had a right to my house, to the dream I'd built over the years with my own hands, my sleepless nights, my hard-earned money. I could barely breathe with rage, but deep down I knew I had no right to explode now. The guests were still in the house, and the party was still going on. I took a deep breath, went back inside, and forced a smile that was already hurting on my face. Beatrice and David soon came downstairs, acting as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. They laughed, poured themselves wine, chatted with my colleagues and friends. The worst part was that whenever someone started praising my house, Beatrice unabashedly took credit for my decisions. "Oh, yes, I asked Arabella to buy those curtains," she said to my colleague Sarah, and then, turning to my neighbor Tom, she added, "And I chose that sofa myself." I stood nearby, nodding and smiling, though inside I was seething, and with each phrase I felt my patience crumbling. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't let my sister and her husband stay in my house. Deep down, I was already plotting how exactly I'd kick them out, and I wasn't afraid, because I'd done too much for this place to let anyone, even family, take it away from me. The party ended around 11 o'clock, and when the last guest closed the door behind them, I went upstairs and froze in horror. My bedroom had been completely taken over. Their clothes were already hanging in my closet, their brushes and creams were on the shelf in my bathroom, and they were acting as if they'd always lived here. That night, I barely slept a wink, tossing and turning under the covers and repeating the same thing in my head. How many years I'd lived with the feeling that I was a superfluous person to my parents, always getting the crumbs, and now they were trying to take away the only thing I'd created myself. But somewhere in the midst of these thoughts, a plan was born, and the next morning, waking up earlier than usual, I already knew what I was going to do. When I went down to the kitchen, I saw Beatrice and David at the table. They were sitting with cups of coffee, lounging as casually as if it were their own kitchen. "We need house keys," Beatrice said, not even bothering to say hello. "We're both leaving for work soon and will be back before you, so we need to be able to get in without any problems." Holding back my irritation, I replied, "I'll come early and let you in. I need to make some extra keys first." Beatrice rolled her eyes, clearly displeased, but didn't press the issue any further. They finished their coffee, walked out the door, and soon their car was pulling out of the driveway. As soon as the door slammed behind them, I grabbed the phone and called my boss. "Hey, I have a family matter today, can I take the day off?" His answer was faintly concerned. "Of course, Arabella, I hope everything is alright." But everything wasn't alright, and I knew that today would be the day when much would be decided. I went up to my bedroom and, wasting no time, began packing Beatrice and David's things back into their suitcases. I folded every shirt, every pair of jeans, every little thing they'd brazenly shoved onto my shelves, back where it belonged. I carefully packed their toiletries into their makeup bag, every last bottle. Then I picked up the phone and called a delivery service, asking them to pick up a few suitcases and deliver them to an address on the other side of town. When the driver arrived, I met him at the gate, helped him load the suitcases into the trunk, and felt a strange relief course through my veins. Everything they'd brought into my house without asking was now leaving. Before he left, I attached a note to one of his suitcases, pouring into it all the despair that had been building up inside me for years. I wrote it clearly and plainly: "Just don't make a scene. I won't allow parasites to live in my house, let them stay with you." I was sure my parents would understand, and they would have no doubt that I had said the last word. But about an hour later, my phone went crazy. It vibrated, rang nonstop, and my mom and dad's names flashed on the screen over and over again. I didn't answer because I knew every word they said would be an attempt to blame me, to pressure my feelings, to make me doubt the wisdom of my decision. When the calls failed, the messages came pouring in. Mom wrote, "How could you be so cruel and selfish?" Dad added, "You kicked your sister out, and she has nowhere to go." And Mom again, "This is unacceptable behavior for a daughter." Each sentence seemed to brand me, but I forced myself to hold on and ignore them all. Then Beatrice's name lit up my phone, and I already knew her words would be even harsher. First came the calls, which I also didn't answer, and then the messages poured in. "What the hell is wrong with you? Where's our stuff?" she demanded. "We broke the lease because Mom said we could live with you. Now we have nowhere to go. And finally, you're ruining our lives for nothing." I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling anger welling up inside me, but I still responded to the last message: "You can live with Mom and Dad until you find a new apartment." After that, I blocked all their numbers. At that moment, it was as if a cord snapped inside me. I'd had enough of this endless drama and manipulation that had been going on since childhood. For 2 weeks after that, my life was surprisingly quiet and blissfully calm. I'd wake up in my own home, and for the first time, it truly belonged to me. No unexpected guests, no condescending remarks, no attempts to take credit for my accomplishments. I'd walk through the rooms, feeling with every detail that this space had been earned and purchased with my labor. I'd sit on the sofa, choose books to read, and my heart would fill with joy. I could finally enjoy what I'd worked so hard for. But just when I almost believed everything was settled, a letter arrived in my mailbox that made my blood run cold. The envelope bore the seal of a law firm whose name meant nothing to me, and inside was an official notice. An unknown lawyer was acting on behalf of my parents. The letter stated in black and white that my parents intended to sue me if I didn't allow Beatrice back into the house. Otherwise, they'd demand the return of the $30,000 they'd once given me for college. I sat with this piece of paper in my hands, incredulous. Were my own parents really ready to threaten to sue their daughter just because I wouldn't let my sister live in my house? I didn't know if they even had any legal grounds to demand the money back, and that only made me more anxious. So I decided to call Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, a wise woman who always had her finger on the pulse of family affairs. "Aunt Patricia, I need to ask you something about the money my parents gave me for college." I said when she answered, "What happened to it, dear?" I heard in response, I swallowed and said, "Do you know where that money really came from?" There was a long pause, and in that silence, I sensed I was about to hear something that would change everything. "You don't know, Arabella," she finally said in a quiet voice, "that money was your grandmother's inheritance, not your parents'." It was like someone had punched me in the chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, hoping I'd misheard. "When your grandmother died a year before you graduated, she left her savings to your parents, but specifically asked that half be used for your education and half for Beatrice's," she explained. I closed my eyes, my head spinning. "Are you serious?" I asked, incredulous. "Absolutely serious. Your parents didn't spend their own money on your college, they used your grandmother's inheritance, which was already intended for you," my aunt replied. "Do you have any proof?" I breathed out, "Actually, yes, your father sent me a copy of your grandmother's will years ago. I can send it to you right now." 20 minutes later, a copy of the will arrived in my email. It clearly stated that the savings were to be divided equally between funds earmarked for the education of my two granddaughters. I sat in front of the screen, my hands shaking as I ran through the lines of text, each letter confirming what my parents had kept from me for years. I immediately made an appointment with a lawyer to discuss my parents' threats. When I explained this situation and showed him the documents, he studied them, first raised his eyebrows in surprise, and then laughed. "Your parents have absolutely no grounds for suing you," he said. "First, the money they gave you was already your inheritance. Second, even if it weren't, any expenses your parents spend on their children's education aren't loans that can be repaid. And third, they can't force you to provide housing for your sister. So, I have nothing to worry about?" I asked, still hesitant. "Not at all," he replied calmly. "Let me write a reply that clearly states their demands are invalid." A few days later, the lawyer sent a formal reply to my parents' lawyer, effectively declaring that they had no legal basis for their claims and that the harassment should be dropped. After that, I heard nothing more about the lawsuits, but despite the silence from the lawyers, my family continued to cause me problems. 2 months later, when I was almost beginning to believe the storm had passed and the worst was over, I received a call from Aunt Patricia, and from her voice, I immediately understood that there was no good news to be expected. "Arabella, I need to tell you what your parents are saying about you," she said in a tense, unusually sharp tone. A nagging pain filled my chest. "What now?" And then I heard something that almost made me drop the phone. My aunt said that my parents were telling everyone in the family that I had promised Beatrice that she could live in my house, but then I kicked them out, allegedly because I was pursuing David, and he rejected me. I was speechless for a second, then managed to whisper, "What are they saying?" But my aunt continued, "They claim you had some kind of insane obsession with your son-in-law, and when he rejected you, you kicked them out in revenge." I sat on the edge of the sofa, feeling a chill run down my spine. My own parents had spread lies about me that could ruin my reputation, and this wasn't just manipulation, it was a blow below the belt. "Aunt Patricia, you know it's not true, right?" I nearly screamed into the phone. "Of course, dear, I know perfectly well it's not true, but they tell that story to anyone who will listen," she replied sadly. I was seething. It was one thing for my family to try to manipulate my emotions and use guilt as an excuse to control me, but spreading lies that could ruin my life was a line I couldn't and wouldn't ignore. That same evening, I messaged my mother on social media, not privately, but right there where other family members could see. "You must publicly refute the lies you're spreading about me. If you don't, I will sue you for defamation. I've already consulted with a lawyer, and he confirmed that your actions are illegal and could have serious consequences for you." I wrote each word slowly, with cold determination, and sent the message without a second's hesitation. Apparently, my threat had worked, because a few days later, Aunt Patricia called again. "Your mother hosted a family dinner," she began. I held my breath. "What did she say?" I asked, clutching the phone in my hand. "She gathered everyone and confessed that she made it all up, that the stories about you and David were her imagination, and that she went too far because she wanted revenge on you for kicking Beatrice out." I felt a strange mixture of relief and disgust. On the one hand, the truth had finally been revealed, but on the other, how could she have even thought of such a thing? "What did the others say?" I asked cautiously. "They were shocked," my aunt replied. No one could believe your mother would spread such a terrible lie about her own daughter. Most of the family now doesn't want to talk to your parents at all." I hung up, my emotions warring in my chest. It was comforting to know that the lie had backfired on those who had invented it, but at the same time, I bitterly regretted that things had reached this point. I never wanted to distance myself from my family. I just wanted to be respected and stop being treated like a doormat. The next few months were the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. No family drama, no relatives trying to move into my house, no crazy rumors. I was finally able to focus on work and enjoy the home I'd worked so hard for. Without constant bickering and stress, my productivity skyrocketed, and soon I got a promotion to senior product manager and a substantial raise. I decided to spend some of the money on landscaping the backyard and installing the hot tub I'd always dreamed of. Life seemed to take on new colors. I even started dating someone new. His name was Marcus, and he was a software engineer at another company. When I told him about my family, he was stunned. "Wait, your sister just showed up with suitcases and decided to move in without permission, and your parents supported it? That's crazy. I can't imagine my family doing something like that," he said, and in his words, I heard for the first time what I'd been hesitant to admit for so long. My family truly was deeply dysfunctional. Marcus and I had been dating for about 6 months, and I felt ready to invite people into my home again, not with trepidation, but with joy. For my birthday, I threw a party, inviting friends, colleagues, and the relatives who had supported me through all the drama. Aunt Patricia came with a couple of cousins who had contacted me when they learned the truth. We had a wonderful time, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I truly had a family that respected and valued me. During the party, my cousin Rachel pulled me aside and said quietly, "Arabella, I need to tell you something about Beatrice and David." I tensed, expecting the worst. "They're going through serious financial difficulties right now. They had to rent a really cheap apartment after you kicked them out, and it seems they skimp on everything, eat cheap noodles, don't go out." I sighed and said, "It's not my problem." Rachel nodded, "I know. And I don't blame you at all. I just thought you should know. Their parents don't help them anymore." "It's true," my mother said. "Your mother confessed. They decided it was time for Beatrice to learn to stand on her own 2 feet." I just shook my head. It's ironic, my parents finally learned to set boundaries with Beatrice, but only after I had to do it myself and go through a hell of humiliation, accusations, and lies before they even understood. A few weeks later, on my way home from work, I stopped at the grocery store and, right at the produce counter, unexpectedly bumped into David. My insides clenched with awkwardness, but he spoke first, and his voice was filled with genuine regret. "Arabella," he said, his eyes slightly downcast, "I want you to know, moving into your house wasn't my idea. Beatrice insisted, and your mother supported her. I thought it was wrong from the start." I looked at him intently and asked the question that had been on the tip of my tongue for a long time. "Then why didn't you say anything?" He sighed, scratched the back of his head, and replied, "Because Beatrice would have made my life hell if I had stood up to her. She was convinced you owed this house to her, since your parents were always less kind to you." I shook my head. "Life doesn't work that way, David, do you understand that now?" He nodded and, with a slight smile, added, "Yes, I understand now. By the way, we're doing pretty well on our own. It's been tough, but we're managing." I felt relieved to hear that they were finally learning to cope with their own difficulties without trying to take someone else's things, and at that moment, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like arguing or making excuses. A quiet satisfaction settled in my soul. Around the first anniversary of buying the house, I decided to throw another housewarming party for myself, this time without any big announcements, without any formal occasions, just to celebrate my progress and the life I'd built with my own hands. Marcus helped me organize everything, and we invited about 30 people, the house filled with laughter, the aromas of delicious food, and the voices of those who genuinely cared about me. I walked through the rooms, looking at my friends, colleagues, and the remaining relatives, and felt like I had a new family, a chosen one, a true one, one that valued me for who I was. Standing surrounded by these people, I realized for the first time how much happier I had become without the constant drama and endless manipulation of my parents and sister. Yes, I had lost some connections, but in return I had gained peace of mind, self-respect, and the confidence that my happiness depended solely on me. I also learned an important lesson about boundaries. For years, I had allowed my family to mistreat me because I believed that was how a daughter and sister should behave, but now I knew that a real family, whether blood or chosen, should support you, not tear you apart. Sometimes I still wondered if my parents would ever apologize or if Beatrice would admit her mistake, but I stopped expecting that. I had built a life without their approval, and I was proud of myself. My career was flourishing, my relationship with Marcus was becoming more serious, and I was surrounded by people who respected and valued me. I was finally living the life I'd dreamed of, and I knew I wouldn't let anyone take that away from me again. The best part was realizing I now had the strength and knowledge to stand up for myself if someone tried to take advantage of my kindness again. I realized that kindness doesn't mean weakness, and setting boundaries isn't selfishness, but a necessity. 2 years had passed since the story with my family reached its peak, and my life had completely changed. The house, once a source of conflict, had become my refuge and a symbol of everything I'd achieved. 6 months ago, Marcus proposed to me right in the backyard, next to the hot tub I'd bought with the money from my first promotion. Everything was perfect, quiet, intimate, personal, in the very space that had become my true home. We were planning a small wedding next spring, just close friends and family who had always supported us. No drama, no pretentiousness, just love and sincerity. My career continued to grow. I was promoted to director of product development, now managing a team of 12. I knew that the ability to set boundaries I'd developed with my family made me a better leader at work, straightforward, fair, and someone who didn't let people take advantage of me. Once a month, I'd call Aunt Patricia, and she'd give me news about my parents and Beatrice. It was usually predictable. "Your parents are still angry about you being estranged from your family," she said one last time. "They keep asking your relatives to talk to you about reuniting." I asked, "And what do you tell them?" She chuckled, "That you're thriving without their drama, and that maybe they should apologize instead of demanding." Then she added, "And Beatrice and David still live in that small apartment. They seem to be doing well financially now, but I heard she's angry because she can't live in your house." I just smiled. It was almost funny that after all this time, Beatrice was still upset about something she never had the right to demand. Some people, it seems, never learn. Last month, David called me unexpectedly. I immediately felt a slight sense of unease, as I couldn't understand why he'd suddenly decided to contact me. "Arabella," he said, his voice a little tense, "I know this may seem strange, but I wanted to discuss something." I paused and carefully asked, "What's going on, David?" There was silence for a few seconds, and then he said, "Beatrice and I are getting a divorce." I was surprised, but I can't say it was a shock, as their relationship had always seemed to me more like a union of convenience than a true marriage built on compatibility and trust. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied quietly, but he quickly added, "The thing is, during the divorce negotiations, a lot came up about what happened to your house." Beatrice admitted that she'd always planned to stay there. "Not just until we saved up." I frowned. "What do you mean?" David sighed heavily. "She never intended to move out. She thought that if you let her stay for a few months, she could arrange all the paperwork so that it would be extremely difficult to evict her." His words cut me hard, and then he continued, "And your mother was in on this whole plan." I caught my breath, feeling truly sick at the realization that my own family was essentially planning to steal my house. "David, why are you telling me this now?" I asked, and he quietly replied, "Because I'm terribly sorry I agreed to this. I should have stopped her, but I was too much of a coward. You deserved better from your family." After we hung up, I sat in the living room for a long time, staring into space, wondering how things could have turned out differently. If I hadn't taken the day off from work to personally pack their things, if I hadn't insisted on my way, they might actually have succeeded in taking over my house. A few weeks later, I received a letter that I almost threw away without even opening. It was from my mother, and it was 3 pages long. The first lines looked like an apology. She wrote that she had been wrong to support Beatrice's plan, that she had acted badly by spreading lies about me, and that threatening me with legal action was vile. But by the second page, I realized it wasn't an apology, but rather an attempt at reconciliation on her terms. She asked me to forgive and forget, so that we could be a family again. She mentioned that she and my father were getting old and wanted to mend their relationship before it was too late, and on the 3rd page, the climax was a confession that they were struggling financially, as their relatives had stopped helping them after they discovered the truth about the lie. and she suggested that perhaps I could help them out financially from time to time, since I was doing so well. I read the letter twice, and then, without hesitation, shredded it. Some people never change, and even when they try to apologize, they still can't resist manipulating and asking for money. That evening, Marcus found me in the backyard. I was sitting in the hot tub, looking at the stars, and trying to regain my composure. He came over and quietly asked, "Are you okay? You seem a little pensive today." I sighed. My mother sent me a letter, some kind of apology, some kind of guilt trip, and some kind of request for money. He sat down next to me and asked, "Are you thinking of writing back?" I smiled sadly. "Not for a second. I've already realized that some relationships are too toxic to save, even if it's family." He paused and asked, "Have you ever regretted ending them?" I thought seriously before answering, "No, my life is so much better without this constant drama and manipulation. I'm happier now, more successful, and surrounded by people who truly care about me, especially you." The following month, we hosted an engagement party at our home. About 50 people came, including several relatives who had once distanced themselves from my parents after learning the truth about what had happened. The atmosphere was warm, joyful, and full of sincerity. My cousin Rachel raised her glass and offered a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "To Arabella, who showed us all that family isn't just about blood relatives, but about those who support your dreams, respect your boundaries, and celebrate your successes. She's built something beautiful here, and we're proud to be part of her family." I looked around at the faces of the people who genuinely cared about me, and suddenly it became clear, I had gained so much more than I had lost. Yes, I had to cut ties with my parents and sister, but I had learned to value myself and fill my life with people who valued me. My home remained the most precious place on earth. Every room reflected my character and my choices. And the backyard became the perfect space for gatherings with friends who truly wanted to be there, and most importantly, it was all mine, earned through my labor and protected by my inner strength. I finally understood that setting boundaries isn't mean or selfish, but a natural necessity for self-respect and mental health. I also understood that some people will always perceive kindness as weakness, and independence as selfishness, and such people simply don't deserve a place in my life. As I planned my wedding and looked to the future, I felt immense gratitude for every difficult lesson I'd learned. My family's attempts to take advantage of me ultimately made me stronger, more confident, and happier. I built a life based on mutual respect, genuine love, and well-deserved success, and no one, not my family or anyone else, will ever take that away from me again.